Thank you. Thank you. So I'd just like to go over the format because we do have people that will be viewing this online at different times. And so this is Dharma Breeze, which is a midweek service that is provided by Ekoji. And it's designed to be a little bit different. What we do is we have a silent meditation. We do a chant. There is a Dharma talk by myself, which is relatively short and is on a specific subject matter. Then we do a group reading. And then we go into, after another short silent meditation, we go into a discussion group. So a lot of times my Dharma talk is regarding what we're going to be talking about in the discussion. Unfortunately for the internet, the discussion group, because of individual issues, that we don't show that, so we don't record that portion of it. So tonight we're going to start with silent meditation. Can you please join me, putting your feet firmly on the floor and relaxing your shoulders? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, 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 namadats. So tonight, because we are going to be talking about ritual, I'd like us to do a little bit of an experiment. So the few of us that are here tonight, we can have a little bit of fun with chanting. So we will be talking about that ritual usually has a set of expectations or rules about how you do a ritual, how you perform a service. So the idea is that normally when we chant, we do it at a very slow pace because our head temple in Kyoto says that we go Namo Amida. But one of the things we have to realize that in the tradition of Buddhism and also in Jodo Shinshu, there are many different chants, and that it's not always at that pace. And so tonight, what I'd like us to do is to experiment a little bit. What I'd like to do is we're going to be chanting the Juni Rai, and what I'd like us to do is to speed it up a little bit. Now, I've learned from my experiences. I did this at Ekoji 10 years ago, and when I did it too fast, people got frustrated because they felt like it was a word, they got tangled up in the words. But the idea tonight is what I like us to do is to chant a little bit faster for the idea to get what it feels like to go from this very slow melodic pace, which is the official Honzan or Honganji view, but then to speed it up. Many of you might not have heard Amida Kyo, which is one of the sutras that we do chant in Jodo Shinshu, and that actually has a variance in pace and rhythm. And so it's very complicated. Actually, it's something that is difficult for me even to chant, because if you hear the professional ministers chant it, they can do it in a very short time. So tonight, what I'd like to do, if you could look at the sutra with me, please. I'd like to explain a little bit about how we're going to change the speed. So for the Junirai, we usually go Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo Amira Sendyo Zokuson. So tonight, for an experiment, for us to feel how it's different, to go a little bit faster, I like to go at this pace. Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo Amira Sendyo Zokuson. Okay, so it's a little bit faster. And like I've said before, when I chant too fast, sometimes we get tongue-tied. So, but I like us to do this, and then in the discussion group, we can talk about how it feels to chant this at the normal traditional pace and how it is to do it tonight at a faster pace. So excuse me, Eric, because I know Eric likes to have it official, but we're going to experiment tonight, Eric, okay? So please join me. Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo Amira Senjo Zokuson Zaihi Mimyo Anako Muryo Bushi Shuinyu Konjiki Shinjo Nyosen no Shama Tagyo Nyozobu Yomoku Jonyaku Shorenge Koga Chorai Midason Menzen Enjo Nyomangatsu Iko Yunyo Sennichigatsu Shonyo ken kukushira koga chorai midason kwannon chodai kwan chuju shuju myoso hoshogon noboku nego makyoman Koga chorai midason mubi muku koshojo shutoku kyoketsu nyokoku shosari yaku tokujizai koga chorai midason Jippo myomon bosashu muryo shoma josandan isho shujo gyarikiju koga chorai midason kontai hoken chinshoke Zengon shoujo myodai za ohiza jonyo sen no koga chorai midason jippo shorai shobushi kengen jinzu shinyanak Sengo sogen jokugyo koga chorai midason shou mujo mugato yakunyo suigatsu denyoro 一生説法無明寺、子が将来見出損、一尊仏説無悪名、薬無如人悪道夫、主任心心教非尊、子が将来見出損、一尊無料法勉強、無少種悪知識、往生不退死菩提、子が将来見出損、画説非尊功徳寺、修善無変如海水、小逆前言、小乗者、エセシュ、上小ひこなまなまなぶなまなぶなまなぶなまなぶなまなぶがんにしくどくよどせいさいどほつぼだいしんおじょあなおNamadots, namadots, 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 namadots. I hope that woke some of us up. So tonight we're going to be talking about ritual. And ritual is something that we don't discuss a lot in our Sunday services. We know that we do practice ritual, and there are traditional rituals in Buddhism as well as Jodo Shinshu. But today I'd like us to kind of pull back and look at what maybe our preconceptions about ritual are. Even though some of us might have been born into the Buddhist tradition, some of us have been raised in other traditions, and even people that might identify saying that I grew up without any kind of tradition, in our American culture or whatever culture you grew up in, the idea of what ritual is has been given to us through all kinds of different social media. And so again, what we think about ritual, whether we think about it in our conscious mind or subconscious mind, impacts how we feel about our Sunday service at a Jodo Shinshu service, for example, at Ekoji. So again, looking up into the dictionary, it says that ritual, and one of the things I always enjoy about looking up things in the general dictionary, because it's always from a Geo-Christian point of view. So I kind of edited this a little bit. So it says, ritual is a religious or solemn ceremony consisting of a series of actions performed to a prescribed order. Wow, that sounds like an engineer did that definition, didn't they? It doesn't sound very spiritual to me. And again, one of the things when I talk to a lot of people at Ekoji, people have these ideas about what religion is and what spirituality is, and they have a viewpoint of that I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, or vice versa. So I like to say whenever I use that terminology, I do not have a specific use for it. When I talk about it, it's just talking about our spiritual realm, whether it's religious or not. I think for myself, because I was raised in a Protestant Christian tradition, my idea of what ritual was taught to me by when I would go to services on Sunday, and most importantly, my grandmother, which I haven't mentioned very much here at Ekoji. I'd just like to mention it right now. My grandmother was an incredible person, born in Tacoma in 1895, lived to be 96 years old, a very devout Christian her entire life. And until she had a stroke about a month before she passed, she was very sharp. And that's because she studied her Bible. And so, she would study the Bible. And I really think that intellectual stimulation kept her going. But she had a very strong opinion about what religion was and what other types of ritual is. And so I think for people that have raised in our society, the idea of the Protestant view of ritual, I think, is very predominant, even though we might not be aware of it. And I'm not putting down Catholicism at all, because I know actually at least one of the people that's in the meeting tonight, I know is raised Catholic, and his parents are Catholic. But the idea of that, what is ritual and is it meaningful, I think has a very different view for who is thinking about it and what tradition that they come from. So I was raised as like, oh, well, look at the Catholic Church. They've got all these saints. They've got Mother Mary. They've got their rosary, right? They've got all these things. And my grandmother would say, oh, that is a way that keeps us away from the essence of God, that's just these layers that are keeping us away. So that was kind of the perspective that I grew up on. I honestly do not believe that now. I have many Catholic friends, and I can understand the richness of the tradition and the rosary. We have our own Nenju. We've talked about before how a lot of the spiritual traditions crossed during the Silk Road era in the Middle East. And so we have our Buddhist beads, and they have their rosary. And some Buddhist traditions use the Buddhist beads as counting beads, like a rosary. So, but the idea is that for us, it's like, oh, ritual is something that is old-fashioned. And again, I think looking at it in the larger society, I hope that a lot of us realize now that with us trying to look at other cultures and different times in a more sincere, gentle light, that we don't, because in the past, even when I was growing up, there's primitive society and primitive religions. And these are the people that dance around the fire, and they're praying for fire, or they're doing a ritual that will create rain so they can have crops grow. And so in my mind, even as a child, is this idea that all of these rituals that were done were kind of meaningless, or what service, what function did they serve? And so I'd like us to look away from that, because when we look at Buddhism in general, we are very rich in traditions of ritual. Jodo Shinshu specifically is very light in ritual, whereas you look at the Tibetan Buddhism. For those that heard my talk last week or the week before, I had a person that came from Malaysia, and he's doing the prostrations on the floor and standing up, and it was very ritualistic, which is not what we're used to hearing in the Jodo Shinshu concept of what ritual is. And I think part of the reason for that is that many of us are aware that Jodo Shinshu is part of the Pure Land tradition. So we're Jodo Shinshu, but Jodo Shu is Honen Shonin's teachings of what the Pure Land teachings are. And so he was the teacher of our founder, Shinran Shonin. And so what he did was that, again, at this time in Japanese history, the idea of single practice became very important. So you have to realize that in other schools of Buddhism, including Tendai, where Shinran Shonin was a monk, and Nichiren was a monk, and Dogen was a monk, you had many different practices. And so these individual people, these men, through their religious experience, realized that I can't do all these various practices. Why can't we focus on one practice? So through that period of Japanese history, we got the single practice. And so in Jodo Shinshu and Pure Land, it was pulled apart from Zen Buddhism. We had a discussion here. you have to excuse me because I supervised 3 temples. And so sometimes I forget where I had the discussion at Seabrook or whether I had it at New York or whether it was with you guys. But I had a discussion, I think it was at Seabrook last week, because they were talking about Zen Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism. And I say, you have to realize that in China, they were practiced together. That is when it comes to Japan, where Honen and Dogen and these other teachers pulled it apart. And so saying that you only need one practice. And so Honen pulled out Pure Land practices from all of these myriad practices that they would do on Mount Hiei in the Tendai tradition, and said that the Pure Land teachings, all you have to do is entrust, and that these are the rituals that you follow. Now, I would highly recommend for any of you that are interested in Jodo Shinshu, just to read even an article on Honen Shonin, because I think having an understanding about how Shinran's thought is a little different than Honen really gives credence to what Shinran did, and how Shinshu is different than Jodoshu or Pure Land Buddhism. And I'm going to talk about really briefly 3 rituals that are practiced in traditional Pure Land Buddhism in Japan that Shinran Shonin said in his writings in the Kyogyo Shinsho that we don't need to necessarily follow these rituals. I think I have mentioned before, especially in my introduction class, that in Jodoshu or Pure Land Buddhism, that on your deathbed, and it's not as emphasized now as it was during Shinran and Honen's time, but the deathbed was a very significant time for a Pure Land Buddhist, because you could have practiced and gone to temple and said the Nembutsu a million times, but if you are on your deathbed and you're not thinking about the Nembutsu or thinking about Amida or the Pure Land or Nirvana at the moment of death, you get reborn. Now that sounds very different, because that's not what we follow in Jodo Shinshu. But they believed, and they had these rituals where they would have friends that would gather around. So you'd say, okay, Michael and you know, Chris, I'm not doing well health-wise. If you please come to my home, if I call you and you surround me, and they would literally at that period of time say the Nembutsu. And the idea was that even if I was in pain or the person's in pain, they would hear the Nembutsu and they'd be concentrating on it. So Shinran, in his writings, again, the Kyogyo Shinsho, very specifically said that we've talked before about the idea of non-retrogression, that once you start that path, that you can't non-retrogression, you can't go back. And so this idea of the deathbed rites, Shinran says it's not necessary, because once you start the Pure Land path, upon your physical death, then you will reach nirvana, the Pure Land, and reach enlightenment. So that is one very drastic change that Shinran said. Now, for anybody that's watching this video from BCA, please forgive me, because Shinran specifically, I have to do that. Shinran specifically would say that I am following the teachers of Honen Shonin, my master. But if you look at the writings of the two, there are variances. And this is one of the major variances, is this idea of that non-retrogression. You don't have to worry on your deathbed. Another one that's more fun, for those of you that have traveled to Japan or have Japanese American friends, and you'll see the little charms hanging in their car, you'll think, oh, what is that? And they'll say, oh, this is a charm, so I won't get in an automobile accident. And so it's a cultural tradition in Japan, whether it's a Shinto shrine or a Buddhist temple, that they will sell these charms or these amulets. So there's all kinds of names in English for them. And so in Japan, if you're going to try to go to university, you go to the special shrine or temple and you buy this amulet or this charm, and it's going to help you through that. Another thing that Shinran Shonin very specifically said is that this idea, and he used the word superstition as the translation in English, is that we don't have to worry about all these other types of superstitions. And so if you go to, if you can't read Japanese or can't speak Japanese, if you go into a temple in Japan and there's no amulets and they're not selling anything, it's probably a Jodo Shinshu temple. For those of us that laugh about it, because we're like, as a realistic fundraising thing, we're like, oh gosh, I wish we could sell those things. We'd make a fortune at Ekoji, right? We could sell them at a Bon, we could sell them everywhere. We could sell them in Seattle, we could sell them anywhere. But we're following the tradition of Shinran Shonin. He says, well, we don't need those. And I'll be perfectly honest, we had a trip to Japan on our 115th anniversary for when I served the Placer Temple 7 years ago. And everybody was asking Brian Nagata, where are the best stores to get these charms? And it's we're going Namo Amida Butsu is expedient means. And then I said, okay, so I wouldn't watch while they went off and they bought all these charms and gave them. But I do like the idea that even to this day, all these hundreds of years later, that we honor that Shinran said we don't need those types of things. And I think the last ritual that Shinran's view is different than Honen's, which is very significant, is what the function of the Nembutsu is. So in traditional Pure Land Buddhism, whether it's Chinese or Japanese, the saying the Nembutsu, it's better to say it 10 times than one time. It's better to say it 100 times, 1,000 times better than 100 times. And so this idea of Buddhist merit, that you generate this Buddhist merit by saying the Nembutsu. And indeed, for those that are interested, there's many interesting historical books on the Pure Land movement in Japan. They actually had people that would do amulets where they would write Namo Amida Butsu, give them to as many people as they can. There's hundreds of them still in existence. There's a dancing Nembutsu where the monks would go and they would be dancing in the streets and saying Namo Amida Butsu, and the people would be dancing with them. So when we think about our BCA temples, we're very subdued compared to the history of how the Nembutsu has been expressed in the past. But again, I think this idea that when we say the Nembutsu, we say it out of gratitude. So it's this idea that we've been talking about, Dharma talk after Dharma talk about that, that we have the Buddha nature, that we are going to become Buddhas upon our physical death, and that it's out of gratitude. It's not a self-practice. Now, I'm not saying the Nembutsu to receive anything. And again, in the Eitaikyo, when we finish a chant, it says that we are sending all these merits onto other beings. So even in our chanting, we're not taking these merits onto ourselves for us to reach enlightenment. We're sharing them. That's a very Mahayana concept, that thank you. And all of us, when at Ekoji, when we chant on a Sunday morning or whatever temple we're at, we're sharing this merit with everyone else. So getting to the ritual, and we will be talking about this and how meaningful it is to you. As I told you, my upbringing was that ritual was quite meaningless, and that was just something that you did as a formality. And I've done a Dharma talk at Ekoji more than once about how learning the tea ceremony helped me understand the significance of ritual, because doing these rituals frees up your mind to understand hearing tea. And it's the same way when we have these rituals that we have embodied in ourselves. We're not thinking about the ritual, we're there expressing and hearing the Dharma. So we started off with the silent meditation in tonight's short service, which is something that we normally don't see in Japan. So for those that are interested, so right now, when we hear the kansho, which is the gong at the beginning of the service, the tradition is that you become silent. So one of the things that, and I know that Eric has done it, and I've done it at every temple I've served, there's people that are talking, it's like when you hear the kansho, that is the call. A lot of times in Japanese, the sentiment is that's Amida calling you to listen. So you hear the kansho, and then the minister's assistants or the ministers come out and go into the onaijin, and that's the time for you to calm your mind. But being in America and not understanding the traditions, we do the formality where at Ekoji and at New York and at Seabrook, where we ring a separate bell and tell people to relax, because the idea is for us to physically relax and open our mind to hear the teachings. Also, we will be doing a group reading tonight, which is a little different. One of the reasons that we do a group reading is that when we do ritual, there's different components that bring out different aspects of our understanding of the Dharma. So if I read a passage to myself, it's different than when I articulate it out loud. And I had the great experience of my first assignment in Fresno, working with a Japanese minister that would have us read the sutras out loud. And that was the first time that I realized that when I read it out loud and I hear it, it has a different meaning to me. It resonates differently than if I'm just in my own head reading the book. And so that's one of the reasons. And again, like with chanting, the idea is that we're sharing one voice and one breath, though post-COVID, that's a little scary, sharing one breath. But the idea is that we're expressing that together as a Sangha and as a group effort instead of being in our own egotistical mind. And so then this will probably be maybe the biggest thing that we'll be talking about in the discussion group is what is the meaning of chanting? And to put it in basic terms, there's people, I'll put it in two camps. One is that there's people that feel that the idea is when you chant that you should be reciting what you understand. And maybe in America, it should be in English, that we should be chanting something that we can understand. And there's another point of view where it's meditative, that what we're doing is we're sharing the breath and that we're concentrating on the process of chanting instead of the meaning. And I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to let that be part of our discussion tonight, because in my unofficial scientific examination, it seems like it's almost 50-50 that people feel like, oh, I really like the Japanese chanting, which most of you probably know that we're not chanting in Japanese, we're chanting in the Japanese version of Chinese. So if a Chinese person hears us chant our chants, or a Japanese person, it's not everyday Japanese. They don't know what we're chanting. And then there's people that say, well, we really need to understand the words. So we've been using the Hawaiian Service book. This is about 10 years old. And Reverend Tennis, who is one of my co-students at IBS, made a very strong point of having all of the sutras translated into English so they can be chanted in English. So one last thing I'd like to finish up, and I've been talking a lot tonight, but is that we had a very exciting meeting today. I was telling Michael, because Michael and I always talk for about 10 minutes. We're talking technical things, we're telling other things. And one of the joys about living in a temple, and like here in New York, I'm literally in the temple, is that I'll meet people and they'll say, hey, Reverend Rai, can we have a meeting today? We'll be about an hour and we need to discuss this. Well, we had a meeting that lasted 3 hours today. And what I'd like to share with you, because it's really in connection with what we're talking about, is talking about ritual, because we are going to be celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Buddhist Churches of America next year. Before that, Chami, who is the minister in the Tri-City Sangha, has been in connection. So at our head temple in Japan, they have created a different form of chanting. And what it is, it's multimedia. And this is not going to be for everybody when you see the videos, because what they do, and it's approved by the Gomonshu, our head abbot, is what they do is that it's not an entertainment, it's a service. And so instead of just doing the regular chanting, what they will do is they'll project the sutras going down. There'll be a light show, there's synthesizers, and the way that the chanting is done is differently. And this is something that's coming out of Japan to try to reach out to the younger generation. And so today we did the planning session, because originally it was going to be New York and LA. And unfortunately, it was going to be Seattle too. I don't know what happened with that, Joe, but the Seattle portion fell off. But now the bishop is wanting us to have it at the Jodo Shinshu Center for that week of celebration for the 125th. And the idea is that it will open up the idea of what is ritual and what is significant. And we're wanting it to be interdenominational, so interfaith. And so, for example, we're going to have we're seeing if we can get one of the Zen monks from Japan, who he doesn't rap, it's more like hip hop. Now, I'm an older person, so when I hear this stuff, it's not necessarily spiritual to me, but they're trying different things. And so he will do the sutras with this style. So that's why it turned into a 3-hour meeting. It's like, what can we do? Where can they go? Where are they going to do? And so the idea is that, again, what's important looking at ritual, it's not entertainment. That's the main thing that the Gomonshu and our head temple in Kyoto we're not putting on a rock show. We're not putting on a pop show. It's going to be projecting the sutras, and it's going to be chanting in a different style. So I just kind of wanted to whet your appetite, because this will be a multimedia event. It will be streamed. And like I said, at this point, it's going to be New York, Berkeley, and LA. And it's going to be something that's very exciting, that we can celebrate modern interpretation of ritual in Shin Buddhism. So I hope that you will enjoy that. And I thought it was ironic that, because I knew several weeks ago my talk tonight was going to be on ritual, and then this whole new venue opened up to me of what we're going to possibly be doing. So please join us online when we have these services, and especially for the 125th anniversary. So what I'd like to do is I would like to conclude with us doing a group reading together, which is Homages, which is on page 2 of the Red Book. If you could please join me. Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living in it. Difficult is it to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear them. If we do not gain emancipation in this present life, we may not be freed from all interfering in the oceans of birth and death for kalpas. Let us reverently take refuge in the 3 treasures. We go to the Buddha for guidance. May we always walk in the way that leads to enlightenment. We go to the Dharma for guidance. May we be submerged in the depth of the teachings and gain wisdom as deep as the ocean. We go to the Sangha for guidance. May we all be one accord, live the life of harmony in the spirit of oneness, freed from the bondage of selfishness. Even through myriads of kalpas, hard is it to hear such excellent and profound teachings. Now we're able to hear and receive them. Let us thoroughly try to understand the Tathagata's teachings. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Datsu. Okay, before we have the discussion, I'd just like to have a few moments of silent meditation. So if you could please relax your back and put your feet firmly on the floor. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Datsu. Namo Datsu.